Werner von Braun, born Silesia 1912, nationality American. Boss of a group of former German rocket scientists, today understandably jubilant.
The greatest day in our life, I think, that a lot of my colleagues are close to retirement or been retired already, will see this as a fulfillment in their life, in their professional life.
Well, a long dream has come true on this day, and I think everybody who has been somehow involved in this project will be extremely happy.
Huntsville, Alabama is the heart of the American rocket industry, and it wears its heart on its sleeve. Of the group of 120 rocket scientists and engineers that von Braun brought with him in 1945, more than half are still here. They've become the folk who live on the hill, in a part of town known sometimes locally as Huntsville.
I think it's probably basically a romantic drive that motivated me. But with romanticism alone, you don't build these things. They're pretty demanding with respect to perfection. They're pretty unforgiving too. There's no such thing as a 99.9% success. That 0.1% can still lead to a complete failure. It was the 3rd of October 1942. And it was not the first attempt either. We had several preceding attempts. Some fizzled entirely and some others were partly successful. We had even one flight that went all the way through sound speed and then broke up at about Mach number 2 times sound speed. But this flight on the 3rd of October, with attempt number 4, was then the first full success. I remember that General Dornberger made a little speech that day, and that speech was maybe quite significant for the feeling we had. In this speech he said, this day will be remembered as the day when spaceflight was born. So there was even no reference at all about to any weapons development at the time. We all had the feeling that the barrier to outer space had been broken, rather than
You've worked for bosses as diverse as Adolf Hitler and John F. Kennedy. Does it matter for whom you make rockets?
Oh, I think it does. It does matter a great deal. Remember, I was a very young man in Germany, and I was so busy with my rockets that maybe in retrospect I sometimes wonder whether I shouldn't have worried a little more about some of these aspects. And as I grew older, of course, and saw the ramifications, of course, also the suffering that's involved, you rethink some of these things. On the other hand, I do not believe that I'm all alone in this respect, because I think, as I see, the early pioneers in aviation probably went through exactly the same thing. They wanted to fly, and they tried to find the money wherever they could get it to do these things. And
was there ever a moment when you thought that you wouldn't reach the moon?
Well, let's put it this way. When I was 17 and started all this, the moon looked a lot closer to me than it did for a long, long time in between. Today it looks again very close, but in the meantime, of course, we've learned a few things. Among others, I've learned, for example, what $1 billion is, something I had no conception for in the early days.
But to Helmut Grotrup, viewing it all from Munich, 3,000 miles away, getting a man to the moon is a waste of both time and money. Does he think that his former colleagues and von Braun, the man who was once his boss, have been misled by the dreams they've lived with for the past 40 years?
Yeah, I think that the whole program, Men in Space, is false. They shouldn't do that. They should spend the money for other things. I would compare it with going to the Mount Everest, you see. You can't come to the Mount Everest by helicopter, but no one does it. They all wish to climb. That's fine, let them climb, and they use money with a small portion of the income of some rich people. But if you send a man to the moon, the first thing is that you have to use a big part of the welcome, is that right, of the income of the whole nation. And if it's so, you have to ask what to do with this money. That is not the money, that's the fruit of the work of all these men and women. You could reach the same goal to take, say, data, scientific data from the moon and from the space and so on. You could reach this same goal by sending automatics into the space with an amount of 10 or 20% of the money they spend now.
You mean mankind will survive? Oh no, I think mankind's a pretty sturdy breed. I think I'm very optimistic that man will stay on top of things in spite of the problems that engineers, among other people, create.
You don't think that we're going to have to escape to Mars one day?
No, I'd rather look at it the other way. I think somehow space flight for the first time gives mankind a chance to become immortal. In other words, once this Earth will no longer be able to support life, we can immigrate and go to other places that are better suited for the support of life.